Catherine of Aragon, born 1485 in Spain, the first wife of England's King Henry VIII, and the daughter of Spanish monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. Her marriage to Henry was initially a political alliance, and she served as queen from their marriage in 1509 until their controversial divorce in 1533. Her inability to produce a male heir led Henry to seek an annulment, setting off a chain of events that ultimately led to England's break with the Roman Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England. Despite the personal and political turmoil, Catherine remained widely respected for her dignity and faith throughout the ordeal. Her steadfast commitment to her marriage and her Catholic faith significantly impacted English and the wider European history, influencing religious policy and politics across the continent. Hello and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, it's great to have you with me again. As always, if you want to support the channel, you're already doing it, simply by enjoying the videos. If you want to go above and beyond, a like and subscribe, and having a look in the description if you feel so inclined to, certainly goes a long way. Now, without further ado, let us begin. Get nice and relaxed. Our full biography of Catherine of Aragon. December 16th, 1485. Catherine was born at the Archbishop's Palace of Alcalá de Henares, near Madrid in modern-day Spain. As the youngest surviving child of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile, she was introduced to a realm influenced profoundly by her illustrious lineage. Her appearance was marked by her long red hair, wide blue eyes and a fair complexion, completed by a round face and stature on the shorter side, reflected in the artwork of the time. Her roots traced back to the English royal house of Lancaster through her maternal line. Her great-grandmother and namesake, Catherine of Lancaster, alongside her great-grandmother, Philippa of Lancaster, both daughters of John the Gaunt and granddaughters of Edward III of England. This connection rendered her not only the third cousin of Henry VII of England, but also the fourth cousin of Elizabeth of York, linking her fatefully to the English crown. Her education in her formative years was, of course, robust and diverse, overseen by one Alessandro Gheraldini, a learned clerk of the Holy Order. Her studies spanned the normal: arithmetic, both canon and civil law, classical literature, genealogy, heraldry, history, philosophy, religion, of course, fostering a profound Roman Catholic faith that would significantly shape her later endeavors. And it wasn't just those subjects. She was also fluent in Castilian, Spanish, and Latin, also with competencies in French and Greek. Her intellectual pursuits were heavily praised by Erasmus, who noted her lifelong dedication to good literature. Beyond the scholarly, Catherine's training extended to the domestic and artistic realms. She reportedly mastered cooking, embroidery, lace-making, sewing, spinning, and weaving, and she was also proficient in music, dancing and drawing from an early age. This comprehensive education not only prepared her for the rigors of court life, but also imbued her with the etiquette that was necessary to navigate these complexities of her future roles in the English monarchy. So, from this very young age, she was earmarked as an ideal consort for Arthur, the Prince of Wales, and also the prospective English king. Her eligibility was significantly enhanced by her maternal English ancestry. Catherine's claim to the English throne was theoretically stronger than that of Henry VII, derived as it was from John of Gaunt, the first Duke of Lancaster's marriages to Blanche of Lancaster and Constance of Castile. Henry VIII, on the other hand, descended from Gaunt's third union with Catherine Swynford, whose offspring were initially illegitimate and only later legitimized, yet still barred from succession. This tenuous claim of Henry's casts shadows on the Tudor legitimacy, with some European realms remaining skeptical of the new dynasty. In stark contrast stood the prestigious House of Trastamara, led by Catherine's parents, the Catholic Monarchs, whose renown made them Europe's foremost royal family. The union between Catherine and Arthur was thus seen not merely as a matrimonial alliance, but as a vital endorsement of the Tudor claim to the English throne, offering any potential male offspring a robust claim of his own. The marital arrangements thus advanced swiftly, with the couple being married by proxy on the 19th of May 1499, and engaging in correspondence in Latin until deemed mature enough for cohabitation. When the time came for Catherine to journey to England, her entourage was a testament to her status. She was accompanied by illustrious figures such as Diego Fernandez de Cordoba, the third Count of Cabra, Alonso de Fonseca, the Archbishop of Santiago de Compostela, and Antonio de Royas Manrique, the Bishop of Mallorca. Notably, her retinue included the first Africans recorded in London, among them the trumpeter John Blank, a symbol of exotic luxury that highlighted the power and reach of her family. Initially expected at Gravesend, Catherine's arrival was met with a retinue of English gentlewomen in October of 1501, ready to escort her via a flotilla of barges up the Thames to the Tower of London, a majestic procession that showed the significance of her arrival, and also the hopes that were pinned upon this union. August 17th, 1501, the youthful Catherine, of just 15 years old, embarked on her journey from A Coruña, destined to meet her future husband, Arthur, the Prince of Wales. Their first encounter occurred on the 4th of November at Dogmersfield in Hampshire. Despite their prior exchanges, through letters written in Latin, their initial face-to-face meeting revealed a surprising barrier. Differing pronunciations of Latin rendered their spoken conversations almost unintelligible to one another. Nevertheless, Arthur expressed his joy and commitment in letters to his parents and in-laws, affirming his intent to be and I quote, true and loving husband, and of course his delight at finally seeing his lovely bride. The young couple's marriage was solemnized just 10 days later, on the 14th of November, 1501, at Old St. Paul's Cathedral, with both bride and groom still only 15 years old. A substantial dowry of 200,000 ducats underscored the union, half of which was promptly paid following the ceremony. On this notable occasion, Catherine and her Spanish ladies-in-waiting made a distinct impression, arrayed in the traditional styles of their homeland, adding a little bit of color to that bleak countryside up north. Well, post-marriage, Arthur had his own responsibilities. He was dispatched to preside over the Council of Wales and the marches from Ludlow Castle, a responsibility befitting his status as Prince of Wales. Catherine accompanied him, embracing her own new role. However, their life together was abruptly challenged when both were struck by illness, possibly the dreaded sweating sickness prevalent at the time. Tragically, poor old Arthur had succumbed to the disease on the 2nd of April 1502, leaving Catherine, now just 16 years old, a widow, far from her native Spain, navigating her uncertain future all alone. Following the premature demise of Arthur, Henry VII was confronted with a significant fiscal and diplomatic dilemma regarding that 200,000 ducat dowry of his daughter-in-law Catherine. As stipulated in her marriage contract, should Catherine return to her native Spain, the substantial dowry, of which we have mentioned only half had been paid, would need to be completely refunded to her father. This predicament was further complicated by the death of Queen Elizabeth in February of 1503, which prompted King Henry VII to contemplate marrying Catherine himself. However, opposition, understandably from Catherine's father, and concerns about the legitimacy of any offspring from such a union quickly quashed this prospect. In an attempt to resolve the situation and retain the dowry within England, they came up with a new arrangement. Catherine would marry Henry VII's second son, the younger Henry, the Duke of York. However, the death of Catherine's mother, which shifted the inheritance of the larger kingdom of Castile to her elder sister Joanna, diminished Catherine's allure in the dynastic marriage market. Well, despite the agreement, the marriage was repeatedly delayed, ostensibly until the young Henry was of suitable age, though the real impediment was Ferdinand II's reluctance to pay the remainder of the dowry, casting doubt on whether the marriage would ever transpire. Well, during this period of uncertainty, Catherine lived under constrained circumstances at Durham House in London, where she was treated more like a detainee than a princess. Her financial struggles were exacerbated by the responsibility of providing for her ladies-in-waiting as well as herself, and that's some pretty high maintenance costs. While the surviving correspondence with her father reveals her resilience and pragmatism, as she once confided to him, and I quote, "I choose what I believe, and say nothing, for I am not as simple as I may seem. Well, in 1507, Catherine's situation took quite a remarkable turn when she was appointed as the Spanish ambassador to England, marking her as the first woman to hold such a position in European history. Contrary to Henry VII's expectations of her being somewhat malleable, Catherine demonstrated considerable diplomatic acumen, standing on her own 2 feet, not to be pushed around by the boys, defying the anticipations of the English court. The proposed marriage to Henry, the Duke of York, hinged on a dispensation from the Pope, as canon law prohibited a man from marrying his brother's widow. Catherine steadfastly maintained that her marriage to Arthur had never actually been consummated, thereby aligning with canon law that a non-consummated marriage could be dissolved, thus paving the way for her eventual marriage to the future King Henry VIII of England. Thus, on the 11th of June, 1509, 7 years following the death of Prince Arthur, Catherine of Aragon once again stood at the altar, this time joined in new matrimony to the newly ascended Henry VIII in a private ceremony held at the church of the observant friars just outside Greenwich Palace. At 23 years old now, Catherine embarked on this second significant chapter of her royal journey, marrying a king who had only recently claimed the throne. Thus, the coronation of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, a splendid and pivotal event, took place shortly thereafter. On the eve of their coronation, Saturday the 23rd of June, they participated in the traditional procession to Westminster Abbey, which drew a large and enthusiastic crowd. Following custom, the couple spent the night at the Tower of London, the most romantic spot in the city, preparing for the grandeur to follow. The next day, Midsummer's Day, they were anointed and crowned together in a majestic ceremony at Westminster Abbey, led by the Archbishop of Canterbury. The coronation was of course a grand affair, complete with a celebratory banquet held in Westminster Hall, and the creation of many new Knights of the Bath in honor of the event. In the weeks that followed, a series of social occasions introduced the new queen to her subjects. Catherine, with her dignified presence and grace, made a strong and favorable impression on the English populace, who received her warmly. Her ascension to Queen Consort marked the beginning of a new era and set the stage for her influential role in the Tudor court. June the 11th, 1513, as Henry VIII embarked on a military campaign to France, Catherine of Aragon was appointed as Regent of England, bearing the formidable title Governor of the Realm and Captain General. Her regency was immediately tested by the capture of Louis d'Orléans, Duke of Longueville and Thorouanne, although Henry sent Duke to Catherine's household. She, concerned about security due to the active Scottish threat to the north, expressed to her Cardinal Wolsey a preference for the Duke's confinement in the Tower of London. In her correspondence, she fervently prayed for divine favour, similar to that which the English king had enjoyed in France. The ongoing war with Scotland, of course, demanded her full attention. Catherine was industrious at Richmond Palace, personally overseeing the production of standards, banners, and badges essential for the war effort. She rallied support by writing to towns such as Gloucester for muster lists, urging the assembly of troops capable of defending the realm. The Scots invasion propelled her to order Thomas Lovell to muster forces from the Midland counties on the 3rd of September, 1513. By the 8th of September, some 5 days later, Catherine, despite her advanced pregnancy, donned full armor and rode north to inspire her troops with a stirring address. Her eloquence and resolve were so impactful that reports of her speech reached Peter Martyr de Anguera in Valladolid within weeks. Contrary to reports that placed her 100 miles north of London when the victory at the Battle of Flodden Field was announced, she was actually near Buckingham. From Woburn Abbey she sent Henry a piece of the bloodied coat of the fallen King James IV of Scotland, suggesting it to be used as a banner at the siege of Tournai. Remarkable taste, as always. Well, as she aged, Catherine's commitment to her Catholic faith deepened, paralleled by a growing interest in academia. She actively educated her daughter when she came along, Mary, and influenced the broader trend of female education, donating generously to several colleges. Meanwhile, Henry had some concerns, and they were concerns about securing a male heir. Well, reminded of course by the historical precedents of long civil wars that were triggered by female succession. So it wasn't just Henry who was crossing his fingers for this, it was everybody else, because they could see what was going to happen a mile away if there was a struggle for power in the wake of Henry's death. It never ends peacefully. Well, in 1520, politics shifted once more, with a visit from Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. Catherine had advocated for an English alliance with Charles over France. Following his departure, she joined Henry in a magnificent visit to France for the Field of the Cloth of Gold. Yet, within 2 years, England had declared war on France, and Charles V was welcomed back, this time with plans to betroth him to Mary. By 1525, Henry's affections had shifted dramatically towards one Anne Boleyn, a young lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, who was, by the way, significantly younger than the king, between 10 and 17 years his junior. As Catherine was no longer able to conceive, Henry's frustrations and desires for a male heir intensified. He began to question the legitimacy of his marriage to Catherine, driven mainly by a biblical interpretation, suggesting a union with a brother's widow would be childless. Well, although Catherine maintained until her death that her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, making her a virgin at the time she married Henry, Henry still saw their marriage as divinely cursed. Well, that's one way of getting out of it. The question of whether the Pope had the authority to override what Henry had viewed as a scriptural impediment became central in his fervent campaign to obtain this annulment. And it's highly likely that the push for an annulment was influenced early on by Henry's desperation for a son, considering the historical context of civil wars fought over the English crown before his father's reign. Bad memories. They don't want to go through that again. Well, his resolve to secure an annulment became his overriding mission. Catherine, however, dug her heels in and remained resolute, famously refusing the suggestion to retire to a nunnery with the assertion, I quote, "God never called me to a nunnery. I am the king's true and legitimate wife." Hard to argue with that, isn't it? Well, in pursuit of his goal, Henry circumvented Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, initially keeping him in the dark, and dispatched his secretary William Knight to Pope Clement VII to argue that the dispensation by Pope Julius II was actually obtained under false pretenses. However, the task proved daunting, as Pope Clement VII was then a captive of Catherine's nephew, Charles V, following a rather unfortunate sacking of Rome in the May of 1527. Now, Knight's mission was stymied, by the way, leading Henry to reluctantly involve Wolsey, who strove to secure a favorable decision the best way he could. And amidst all of these ecclesiastical negotiations, both Pope Clement VII and the reformer Martin Luther, who was universally loved and popular at the time, suggested an unconventional solution: that Henry might take 2 wives to maintain the royal dignities of both Catherine and their daughter Mary. This proposal was not aimed at reintroducing polygamy broadly, but rather as a specific measure to resolve the royal dilemma. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey took significant steps to resolve Henry's dilemma by setting up an ecclesiastical court in England, with a papal representative presiding, on both Henry and Catherine in attendance. Despite this effort, the Pope, possibly swayed by the influence of Charles V, Catherine's nephew, recalled his legatee, thereby halting any proceedings taking place in England. Henry perceived the Pope's actions as a clear signal that an annulment of his marriage to the Emperor's aunt was not going to happen. Consequently, the Pope explicitly forbade Henry from remarrying until a decision was reached, and he meant a decision in Rome. Wolsey's failure in this endeavor led to his dismissal from public office in 1529. Subsequently, he engaged in a covert attempt to have Anne Boleyn exiled and communicated with the Pope towards this end. Upon discovery, Henry was not impressed and ordered the immediate arrest of Wolsey. His death in 1530 from terminal illness likely spared him from execution for treason. Which leads us to 1531, the following year, after all of these tumultuous events, if we may say so. Catherine was removed from court, and her chambers were reassigned to Anne Boleyn, can imagine how she felt. As a matter of fact, you don't need to imagine. We have a letter that she had wrote to Charles V expressing her despair at the time, and I'll quickly read a passage from said letter. My tribulations are so great, my life so disturbed by the plans daily invented to further the king's wicked intention, the surprises which the king gives me, with certain persons of his council, are so mortal, and my treatment is what God knows, that is enough to shorten 10 lives, much more my own. Obviously not very impressed with the goings-on in the court. Well, in terms of religious affairs, the ecclesiastical landscape shifted further when Archbishop of Canterbury William Warham passed away, and Thomas Cranmer, the Boleyns' family chaplain, was appointed to the position. As Henry pushed for an annulment, John Fisher emerged as Catherine's staunch advocate, boldly defending the sanctity of her marriage in the papal court. His outspoken stance, reminiscent of John the Baptist's readiness to sacrifice himself for his belief, certainly drew Henry's ire. More than a raised eyebrow, perhaps a clenched fist. It prompted the king to craft a detailed Latin rebuttal to Fisher's arguments. Fisher's annotated copy of Henry's address, by the way, still exists, evidencing his fearless disposition despite the king's wrath. You've got to be pretty brave to go up against the King of England. Well, following the transfer of the case to Rome, Fisher's direct involvement ended, but Henry's resentment towards him persisted. Catherine's plight garnered widespread support, not only from Fisher but also from notable figures such as Thomas More, Henry's sister Mary Tudor, the Queen of France, Maria de Salinas, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Pope Paul III, and even Martin Luther himself, illustrating the broad and diverse backing she received during her ordeal. Well, after a covert meeting in Calais with King Francis I of France, Henry returned to Dover and, in secret, married Anne Boleyn. The precise motives behind their hasty marriage are debated. Some believe that Anne was already pregnant, and Henry wished to avoid the possibility of an illegitimate heir, while others argue that Anne, having witnessed her sister Mary Boleyn's brief affair with the king and subsequent disregard, insisted on a marriage before any intimate relations. Smart girl. Henry justified their union by arguing the invalidity of his marriage to Catherine, given her prior marriage to his brother Arthur, and he thus claimed that if Catherine's marriage to Arthur was consummated, he was free to marry under canon law. At least that's what he kept repeating to himself and the angry onlookers as he tied the knot with his new wife. Well, on May 23rd, 1533, Thomas Cranmer, presiding over a specially convened court at Dunstable Priory, officially declared Henry's marriage to Catherine unlawful, dismissing Catherine's steadfast assertion that her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated. And just 5 days later, Cranmer affirmed the legality of Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn. So, it was done. The paperwork had all been signed, and, well, it was all over for Catherine. Well, not quite. Despite these declarations, Catherine maintained her status as Henry's legitimate wife and England's rightful queen till her dying day, a title her servants continued to use in her presence. However, Henry only recognized her as the, quote, Dowager Princess of Wales. Still not a bad title, but not the one she wanted. He acknowledged her as the widow of his brother, rather than as a queen. Well, her final years were marked by isolation and frequent relocations. She resided at the Moor Castle in Hertfordshire, starting in late 1531 rather, going back in time there for a moment, before being moved to the royal palace of Hatfield, Elsing Palace in Enfield, Ampthill Castle in Bedfordshire, and finally the coveted Buckden Towers in Cambridgeshire. Just a side note, don't you just love these English town names? They're just so charming. Well, in July of 1533, she was moved to Kimbolton Castle, where she lived a reclusive life, dressed in the austere garb of a Order of St. Francis, and adhering to strict religious fasts. Catherine reportedly rarely left her room, except of course to attend Mass. Although she was allowed occasional visitors, she and her daughter Mary were prohibited from seeing or even writing to each other. However, sympathetic intermediaries secretly exchanged letters between them. Henry proposed improving living conditions and the possibility of reunion if both of them had acknowledged Anne Boleyn as queen. But good luck getting that to happen. Both mother and daughter steadfastly refused. In the late December of 1535, with her health rapidly deteriorating, Catherine prepared for her impending death. She drafted her will and reached out to her nephew, Emperor Charles V, requesting his protection for her daughter Mary. Amidst these solemn preparations, she is said to have written a poignant final letter to King Henry VIII, and it goes a little like this, and it's a little bit sad, forewarning. My most dear Lord, King and husband, the hour of my death now drawing on, the tender love I owe you forceth me, my case being such, to commend myself to you, and to put you in remembrance with a few words of the health and safeguard of your soul, which you ought to prefer before all worldly matters, and before the care and pampering of the body, for which you have cast me into many calamities, and yourself into many troubles. For my part, I pardon you everything, and I wish to devoutly pray God that he will pardon you also. For the rest, I commend unto you our daughter Mary, beseeching you to be a good father unto her, as I have heretofore desired. I entreat you also, on behalf of my maids, to give them marriage portions, which is not much, they being but 3. For all my other servants, I solicit the wages due them, and a year more, lest they be unprovided for. Lastly, I make this vow, that mine eyes desire you above all things. From Catherine, the Queen. I told you it was sad. While the authenticity of the letter has been debated, its contents certainly reflect the enduring grace and even forgiveness that Catherine maintained towards Henry. Well, we can say for sure that if this letter was somehow intercepted by Henry's new wife, well, that would certainly cause an argument. Some things never change. Thus Catherine passed away on the 7th of January 1536 at Kimbolton Castle. The news of her death spurred various reactions at court, and of course sparked rumors of foul play, including speculation that she had been poisoned, possibly by Gregory de Castile. Mourning practices also attracted attention. Anne Boleyn and possibly Henry himself were reported to have worn yellow, a color associated with mourning in Spain, though this was seen by some as inappropriate or perhaps even celebratory. Despite the public display, both Henry and Anne reportedly mourned privately later that day. On the day of her funeral, Anne miscarried a male child, leading to further grim rumors about Catherine's death, though modern experts believe that her symptoms, as reported, were more consistent with those of cancer. Either way, she was laid to rest in Peterborough Castle, honoured as a Dowager Princess of Wales, but of course not as the Queen. Henry abstained from the funeral, and also prohibited their daughter Mary from attending, highlighting the continued complexities of his relationships and the turbulent era of his reign. Regardless, not a very kind move to bar Mary from going to her own mother's funeral under any circumstance. Now let's talk just a little bit about Catherine's religious observance, because it is a rather important part of her life. So before we go, let's just say a few words on that. Of course, she was deeply committed to her faith, and a devout member of the Third Order of St. Francis. She meticulously balanced these royal duties of hers, in any capacity, with her religious obligations, seamlessly integrating the demands of her role as queen and later on the smaller role she played with her personal piety. Now, after her marriage to Henry was annulled, she famously declared her spiritual priorities by stating, and these are her words, "I would rather be a poor beggar's wife and be sure of heaven, than queen of all the world and stand in doubt thereof by reason of my own consent." Thus, her religious practice was marked by a focus on the essential elements of Catholic devotion, the Big Four: Mass, prayer, confession, and penance, rather than the outward celebration of saints and holy relics, which she did not emphasize in her personal views on spirituality. But despite this, she remained acutely aware of the flaws she perceived within the Church's hierarchy, though she maintained a critical distance from the more radical criticisms like those proposed by Martin Luther of 1517, which ignited the Protestant Reformation, and, well, plenty of other events. You may want to watch the video on Martin Luther. It's quite interesting, especially his later writings. Now that is a rabbit hole. Well, back to Catherine. In her youth, she was lauded for her exceptional beauty, described as, and I quote, "the most beautiful creature in the world," and it was said that there was nothing lacking in her that the most beautiful girl should have. Esteemed figures like Thomas More and Lord Herbert later reflected on her appearance, noting, there were few women who could compete with the Queen in her prime. These accolades highlight the remarkable impression Catherine made with her striking looks and royal demeanor throughout her life. But of course, it's not all about the outside appearance. It can't be. She was not only a queen, but also a pioneering advocate for women's education, and that is important. This is exemplified by the controversial book, at least at the time, The Education of a Christian Woman by Juan Luis Vives, which argued that women have the right to an education, and was both dedicated to and commissioned by Catherine. I know this all sounds pretty obvious, but you must send your brain back in time a little bit. Well, her influence extended even to her adversaries, as Thomas Cromwell, a known opponent, remarked, if not for her being a woman, she could have defied all the heroes of history. Catherine's compassion was evident when she successfully interceded on the behalf of the rebels of the evil May Day, advocating for their lives for the sake of their families. Not often something you see in royals. Her commitment to social welfare in general was further demonstrated through her initiation of an extensive program for the relief of the poor. A patron of Renaissance humanism, Catherine was friends with notable scholars such as Erasmus and Thomas More, and some even viewed her as a kind of martyr. Well, her final resting place, in Peterborough Cathedral, is a site of continuous tribute. You'll rarely see it without decorations of flowers or pomegranates, which are, by the way, her heraldic symbol. Hers is a tomb that proudly bears the inscription, Catherine, Queen of England. In the 20th century, George V's wife, Mary of Teck, had her grave notably enhanced, further affirming her as her status as queen. Annually, Peterborough Cathedral holds a service in her memory, featuring processions, prayers, and various events, including tributes at her grave with candles, pomegranates, flowers, and other offerings. Notably, the Spanish ambassador to the United Kingdom attended the service commemorating the 470th anniversary of her death. And in 2010, the service included a reading of Catherine's speech before the Legatine Court by actress Jane Lapotaire. In her birthplace of Alcalá de Henares, a statue captured her as a young woman holding a book and a rose, symbolizing her lifelong dedication to not only learning, but everlasting grace. And if you've listened this far, perhaps you too have a dedication to learning. Not many make it to this point. If you did, you get the special message. One that I haven't thought of yet. Check back in the next video for your special message. Well, I would like to thank my top-tier patrons, Britt, JC, Charles, Stark Factory, Jeffrey, Wendy, and Tim. Thank you very much for supporting. If you would like to do so, you know what to do. And until next time, thank you very much. Must admit I struggled a little bit with this one because I'm recovering from COVID. Not sure if you hear it in my voice, but we're all doing our best, aren't we? Good night, everyone. Lots of love.